Hey guys, I'm Jessie, and today I have a fun video for you. I was doing a World Hopper video recently where we reacted to a bunch of assumptions about the fantasy genre, and it was a lot of fun. And if it's up by now, I will link it. If not, just I'll link the World Hopper channel itself because it's such a fun, collaborative booktube channel. It's not all fantasy. It is literally every genre, and it brings together a bunch of fun booktubers from all over the place, and they have conversations about different genres and tropes and books and all kinds of stuff. And when you watch those videos, all of the AdSense revenue goes to charity, which is, of course, always fantastic. And they have some really cool merch, which I have somewhere in my closet that I couldn't find right now. But all of their merch also goes to charity, all of the proceeds from that. So if you want to watch some really cool booktube videos, maybe get to know a few other booktubers, check it out. It's a really good time. I always am very happy when I'm asked to be on the booktube channel, the World Hoppers. But when we were going through some of the different assumptions that people have about the fantasy genre, I started getting some ideas for some videos to do, and one really stuck out to me. One was an assumption that fantasy is all written by middle-aged misogynistic white men. And that is just not the case. And it kind of made me a little sad to see that that is one of the assumptions of non-fantasy readers, is that fantasy is written by misogynistic middle-aged white men. And maybe 50 years ago that would be the truth, but there are so many diverse fantasy books out there that are not old white men. And then one of the other ones that I thought what kind of went along to it is that it was all medieval fantasy, and also not the truth. So I wanted to talk about a few of my personal favorite non-middle-aged white man medieval fantasy books. So don't really know what I'm going to call this. I guess diverse fantasy books. Pretty sure all of these are written by females, and they are all non-medieval, pretty non-Western. They are some of my favorite books. And if you think that fantasy is all old white men on horses, then you might want to check some of these out and prove yourself wrong. So some of these are going to be YA and some of these are going to be adult. I will let you know the difference. The first one is a YA fantasy, and that is Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This is an Asian-inspired fairy tale retelling, and it is so good. If you like fairy tale retellings, definitely check this out. I have a full review for this book also that I'll link for you if you want to get more in depth on it. But basically, this follows our main character, Shiori, and she is a princess. She has 6 brothers and her evil stepmother, and one day she kind of exposes herself that she has magical powers. Her stepmother puts a bowl on her head to suppress her magic, turns her brothers into cranes, and tells her to flee the kingdom. And for every word she utters, one of her brothers will die. So she has no words to speak, right? Because if she says one word, one brother will die. 2 words, 2 brothers will die. And this is the story of her overcoming that and trying to figure out how to save her brothers, how to get out of this situation, how to get this stupid bowl off of her head. And it's really, really fun. I really enjoyed it. It's very whimsical and light and magical. It's not a dark, heavy, epic fantasy. It is definitely a fairy tale retelling. It feels very fantastical and whimsical. And I think this is perfect for YA readers and adult readers. Then we have an adult book that is one of my absolute favorites. If you've been around here a minute, you know, and that is Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. This is a self-published Asian-inspired fantasy, and our main character is a badass mother. And I actually did a whole video on badass moms in fantasy where you'll see me talk about this more. But we are following Masaki as well as her 14-year-old son. She has a couple kids, but all boys. Her oldest is a 14-year-old, and we kind of alternate between their perspectives. And Misaki, at one point in her life, was this like very independent woman, like crime fighter, kind of like just like very independent woman. And then in her current day, she is a wife and mom, and she's kind of resenting that. And there's definitely no like real love between her and her husband. She feels like kind of a failure as a mom, and she like longs for that past. You can tell, right? She longs for what she once had, because now she is not an independent woman. And just because you're a wife and a mom does not mean you're not an independent woman. But in this case, it does, right? It's in a very misogynistic area that she's in. And it's about her kind of overcoming that, as well as like her son's struggles when he realizes that the world is not as rose-colored as he may think it is. And this is heart-wrenching. It is as a mom, it is so much emotion that was pulled out of me as a mom, especially as a boy mom. And I want everybody to read this. I think it's fantastic. And it's definitely not a middle-aged white man authored fantasy. Then we have another YA book, and that is The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. This is actually an African-inspired fantasy, and it is so fun. We follow our main character as she turns 16, and in this world at 16, they are cut and their blood is tested, basically. So if you bleed red, you're a regular person. If you bleed gold, then you're a demon, and they kill you. Well, she ends up bleeding gold, and she ends up getting like sent off to this super secret like army with other girls like her who are Gilded Ones, as they all bled gold. And she basically has to fight for this country that like doesn't really care for them anyway. They're basically cannon fodder. And it is so good. There's a lot of really good like sisterhood moments, and there's no real like girl on girl infighting. There's a lot of like good female friendship representation, and I really enjoyed this. Again, I have a full review for this book. I'll link my spoiler-free review playlist for you if you want to check it out, but I have a full review for this one too. And book 2 is coming out soon, so get on it. Now we're popping back over to adult, and we've got City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This is a completed trilogy that is kind of 1001 Nights-esque feeling, and it is set in Cairo. We are following Nari as she is like this like street rat urchin con woman. She accidentally summons a djinn one day and turns her life upside down. She has to go to this magical city of Devabad. She learns who she is, and she learns so much more about like the magical world that she didn't believe actually existed. There is a really great romance in this book. And like, you know, I'm not a big romance reader, but I like the way the romance is done. We have, you know, a strong female character that's not like other girls. We have some really morally great characters, and I really love this series so much. I actually have a reading and recipes, which is the only one I've done, and I keep saying I'm going to do more. But like, y'all, those are so time consuming. On this book where I cook a recipe that was inspired by this book, or that like made me think of this book. I did a like Egyptian street food, a vegan Egyptian street food, and talked about this book. So that was a lot of fun. So if you want to check out that video, you can. Then we have another YA book, but I feel like this one borders on adult more so than the rest. And that is the Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This is an Indian-inspired fantasy where we also have a sapphic relationship. And I love it. This was definitely a slower start, but once it picks up, it really does pick up. It is definitely a more slow fantasy read, so if you want something real fast-paced, this is not it. But I absolutely loved it. We are following two separate girls. One is the sister to the emperor, and she's kind of imprisoned and she's going to be sacrificed. One is this girl who escaped genocide, basically, and she is kind of pretending to be the maid for the empress sister that's supposed to be sacrificed. And they end up kind of forming a relationship and trying to save everybody. So definitely check this one out. Next, we have another adult book, and that is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is an Asian-inspired historical-esque fantasy. It is very inspired by, like, the Opium Wars that were a real thing. Beware, there is a chapter in this book where it gets very, very dark, and any trigger warning you can think of, it's very, very brutal in this one chapter, and it really shows the atrocities of war. I always like to make sure people know that if they haven't picked this book up yet. If you want a good feeling about what that chapter entails, research the Opium Wars and research the Rape of Nanking, because it was pulled from the history books, right? All the atrocities were literally pulled from that true life event, and it is utterly, utterly terrible. But the book itself is fantastic. I love this series. We're following Ren, who is a war orphan, and she is definitely mistreated by her adoptive family. Like, they never wanted her. They were actually forced to adopt her because, like, everyone's forced to adopt a war orphan if they can. She's supposed to be married off, and she decides, nah, not for me, and she ends up studying and getting into this, like, really prestigious military school. And while at the school, she makes some friends, she makes some enemies, and come to find out she has this connection to one of the pantheon of gods. And y'all, this book is so good. The first half feels more YA. It is very school-based and like a real kind of ease you in. But then there's like an abrupt change at about the halfway point where we dive into like deep, dark war territory. So just be aware of that. But this is such a good. Then we have another YA book, and this is one that I also think borders on could possibly be adult-esque, and that is An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. I love this book. This is, again, a more like Middle Eastern-esque inspired book where we have these scholars, is what they're called, and they have been kind of colonized by the Empire. And the Empire is very like Roman based, right? And we're following our main girl, Laya, as she kind of goes undercover with this resistance to kind of try to free her brother. And then we follow our main guy, who is a member of the school where she's undercover. So he is a member of like the ruling class and she is a member of the underclass. Yes, there is a romance element, but it's not over the top and annoying because you know how I feel about romance. I really love this. There's Jen and magic and rebellion, and it's definitely not a white male authored book. Then we have another adult book, and that is Black Sun by Rebecca Rowanhorse. This is the first book in a fantasy series, and this is a pre-Columbian inspired series. I absolutely love this book. We follow multiple POVs. We follow one individual who was blinded at birth, and he is believed to be like a chosen one type character. We follow a girl who is part, I believe, like siren-esque mermaid, and she kind of pairs up with our chosen one guy, and they go on this quest to kind of get him where he needs to be. Then we have another girl who is from like this lower class, ends up rising up to priesthood, but she kind of gets thrown into the middle of like some political machinations, and they don't really like her, and it's really hard to explain this book. And I know I'm doing a terrible job of it, but just check it out and pick it up because it is fantastic. And the final book on this list is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. Really anything by N.K. Jemisin, but like The Fifth Season is my favorite N.K. Jemisin book. But you can also read The City We Became. You can also read The Dreamblood duology. I haven't read 100,000 Kingdoms yet, but I'm sure I'm gonna love it too. But this is my absolute favorite of her book. I have a full spoiler-free review on the whole series if you want to check that out. But we are, again, following a badass female mom, and she is on this mission to find and save her daughter after her husband murdered their son and kind of took off with their daughter. And in this world, we have a lot of like post-apocalyptic events. They are called fifth seasons. And it is in the middle of like probably the last fifth season, the big one, right? The one that's like gonna really end the world. And it's so good. We have forbidden magic. We have, multiple points of view from different like female characters of varying ages. And I can't sing the praises of this book enough. I love it so much. All right, well, that was my initial list of diverse fantasy books that were not written by middle-aged white men. They're not middle-aged white men authors. They're not medieval fantasy. And honestly, there's so many more that I could have talked about, but like these are some of my absolute favorites that I wanted to like really, showcase because I love them and I really think they fit that idea of diverse fantasy books because, like I said, that comment that I saw about like, oh, well, all fantasies written by like middle-aged misogynistic white men. Not the case, obviously. So hopefully you got some good recommendations for this. Let me know what you think about any of these books. If you plan on picking up any of these books, let me know. And if you have any recommendations for me, always drop those in the comments below because I would love to see them because I need my TBR to grow apparently. All right, well, my name is Jessie. Thank you for hanging out with me and I will talk to you next time. Bye.